And you might have already seen the video that I did prior to the trip about my equipment. Well, this is what worked and what didn't. Let's begin with shoes. This is something that I didn't go through in the last video because I hadn't received them yet. I literally got these shoes the day before I left. So this is the shoe that I chose to use. This is the New Balance Hero V5 Fresh Foam, and they are comfortable. They are actually too comfortable. I chose to use this shoe instead of wearing a zero drop, barefoot style shoe. I've got a lot of questions about, oh, why didn't you go barefoot? So given the fact that I'm not completely adjusted to barefoot to do a 500-mile journey, I thought it'd be best to go for the safe option, and I'm glad I did. And I'm pretty impressed with how well it stood up. I did a comparison on Instagram when I went into a shop halfway through my trip to show you the difference in the tread. So you can see now that this shoe has basically lost the vast majority of its tread on the ball of the foot, which probably tells me something about the way I walk. Apart from the fact that it's lost a lot of tread, the shoe's still in pretty good condition. I wouldn't call it a one-trip shoe. I would continue to run and to wear this on shorter hikes, but yeah, the fact is that it is running out of tread. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the shoe. All right, let's talk about my backpack. So this is the lightweight equipment Elementum. I said some nonsense about this backpack in the last video. Firstly, I think I said that it was DCF. It's not DCF, it's high density polyethylene. Just bear with me because I'm new with this stuff. And I kind of assumed, well, basically in that case, it's just a gigantic dry bag. And in a lot of ways it is, but what I have noticed, and it's really the only thing bad about this backpack, is that that coating does wear off. So I've flipped the bag inside out and you can see this is the waterproof coating, and you can see some of that starting to come off. That's, I guess, is just wear and tear. This would be the back of the backpack where I would have my little foam support, and I guess it's kind of worn some of that off. But I mean, if you use a proper pack liner, which I think you always should, then it's not going to be a problem. Just don't rely on this to be 100% totally waterproof, and realistically I think very few backpacks are. The other thing I said, which was a bit nonsense, was that by adding this I kind of had a framed backpack, which I don't. The main key about having a framed backpack is that you have a shoulder strap here, a tensioning strap, which takes the weight off your shoulders, distributes it into the frame, and then that distributes that weight into the hips. So this is 100% still a frameless backpack. So I just wanted to clear that up. Now, if you are considering going frameless, there's a couple of key things that I think you should think about and understand when it comes to going frameless. You don't want to go over and above the recommended weight limit. The recommended weight limit for this is 12 kilos. So keep that in mind, because A, you may be doing damage to the backpack if you're carrying too heavier loads, and B, you might be damaging yourself. You might be under too much stress on your shoulders and your upper back muscles if you've overloaded a frameless pack. So really keep that in mind. Don't just get a frameless pack because it's lighter and then carry more than what's recommended in the backpack. You are going to suffer, and the pack's going to suffer as well. So just keep that in mind. In terms of the design, it was absolutely perfect. Nice big hip pockets, which is what I wanted. It's extremely durable. I was walking past barbed wire gates and fences, and there's no holes in this backpack. I really wouldn't change anything. This is an amazing pack. I think this will be my through hiking pack forever, unless I get to the point where I'm an ultralight guy and I can really slim down the size and the things that I'm carrying in my pack. It's probably not going to happen for a while though. All right. One thing I neglected to talk about in the last video was my trekking poles. I really should tell you the truth about these trekking poles because I broke one. This is really not designed to be a through hiking trekking pole. It is a trail running pole. So I'm overloading it by using a backpack with 12 kilos, and that was putting a lot of stress on the trekking pole, and I snapped this section here. Thankfully, I got in touch with Lecky and I was like, hey, can you send me another pair? What's important to note here is that carbon fiber is very light, and it has a tendency to shatter. So that's your drawback. Now, perhaps the smarter decision for me was to order or take in the first place, the aluminium version. And when you have aluminium, that tends to just bend if you put the pole under too much pressure, and you can just bend it back, it's not an issue. But with carbon fiber, it will just shatter. Having said that, I still am really glad that I bought these poles. This setup here with the glove, I was thinking that that might be annoying, and sometimes it was, but once I got used to that clipping system, then it was fine. It just meant that I had the gloves on all day, and I got a pretty savage trekking pole glove tan. Okay, in terms of what's inside the backpack, pretty much everything in my pack was in a plastic vacuum sealed bag. It was basically just like a cheap, lightweight, but fairly heavy duty plastic outer bag that I used as a pack liner. I should have just chosen to bring my pack liner. The reason I did it is because it weighed 93 grams, and at the time I was like, that's too much. I should have just brought the pack liner, because that shitty plastic bag that I was using broke at about 3 weeks in. I did have one very rainy day where I didn't have a pack liner, and thankfully I used dry bags to put absolutely everything in. So this is a Cedar Summit one, and this is my bathroom stuff in here, miscellaneous stuff, I guess. Super glad that I bought these. I would really highly recommend bringing some earphones, because you never know who you're going to be hiking with. They could snore for the entire time, so very good to have those. What else is in here? These things were great. This is the Cedar Summit Trek and Travel soap. Tiny little, really thin soap, but that saved me a lot of weight because I didn't have to bring, you know, actual liquid soap. Dental floss. Very good idea to bring some dental floss, not only because dental hygiene is important, but also with a little needle you can use that. It's much stronger than thread, so you can make some repairs. I actually did that on one little piece of equipment that I'll show you later. So this is a little lightweight travel mirror. I'd never used it, but the reason that I bought it, two things. Old school like signaling, if it ever got to that point, which I'm sure it never will. But the main reason I bought it is because if I got something in my eye, if I had like dirt or some kind of intrusion in my eye, that I could look closely and wash it out, but thankfully I never had to use that. That's the tube from my water filter, which I'll talk about later. I have micro pure tablets for treating water just as a backup, never had to use them. I've got a couple of band-aids. I brought some Luco tape. I didn't really have any problems with blisters, but it's always good to have that stuff. Sometimes I would just tape the bottom of my feet just because they started to get quite sore and very tender. So just putting some tape around certain spots on my heels and my forefoot really helped with that. I've got in here some tenacious tape. That is pretty good stuff. I would highly recommend it. Very, very expensive, but when you are talking about repairing gear, I really don't think there's anything better on the market. Tenacious tape is good stuff. Super glue, pretty important to bring along. I always have a couple of cable ties. They really come in handy. Sunscreen, obviously very important. Toilet paper was obviously usually in there as well, and on the outside of my pack always kept a trowel. I have my little microfiber towel in there. It's possible to dry yourself with a microfiber towel this small, but sometimes it's just not absorbent enough. It ends up just getting so wet. I probably could afford to have a little more luxurious towel. I'll think about that in future. And ibuprofen, anti-inflammatories that I never used, thankfully. So I didn't end up bringing a real first aid kit. Probably be taking a pretty standard first aid kit. You could pass through a town and go to a pharmacy and get pretty much anything you need along with this trip, so that was never really an issue. Another dry bag with some random stuff. This was kind of like my entertainment dry bag. I had my journal in there, and it was really nice to like just write little notes along the way and just things I wanted to remember. I wrote down the miles that I did each day. Most of the time I wrote the ascent that I did each day. My sunglasses that I ended up bringing are the Valon Classics. These are the Waylons. Firstly, they're basically unbreakable. Check that out. Like you can bend. They're not gonna break. They're also super light. These are 19 grams. Now, if you look closely, as you can see, I did wear out some of that mirror casing. That's because I'm super lazy and I put them straight into the pocket on my backpack, and that eventually just wore out some of the mirror casing. What I should have done is use the case that comes with it. That hasn't affected the use of the actual sunglasses. They're still great. I've got nothing bad to say about these sunglasses. Keen observers of my photos and my Instagram account would have noted that I was wearing a fanny pack. This is something that I bought from just the Chinese shop literally 10 minutes before I got on the train to start the trip. I didn't want to have to take my backpack off to get my camera out every single time I wanted to take a photo. That would have really limited my content creation on the trip. So I wanted to have access to my camera right at my hips. And this was just big enough to fit the Canon M50. Credit cards, my wallet essentially, anything else I wanted, my headphones maybe were in the front of that. Anything I needed super quick and easy access to was in my bum bag slash fanny pack. But obviously, yeah, this is terrible quality. This is the one thing that I did do some repairs on and did some sewing on, which was kind of fun along the way. But yeah, this cost me like €5 and it's obviously a piece of junk, but you know, it lasted. This is my makeshift wallet, which is just a Ziploc bag that has my credit cards in it with a couple of Us Took Us stickers on either side. Very high quality. Okay, in here is my electronic stuff, again in a Cedar Summit dry bag. Oh, these things saved my life. So these are from Sony, they're a Bluetooth model. Obviously it's nice to be out in nature listening to the sounds of the mountains, but when you're walking for a month non-stop, it does help to be distracted a little bit. I chose to get Bluetooth because I didn't want to overdo the headphones. I knew that if I run out of battery on these, I'd just be like, oh, that's a sign I've been listening to too much music or too many audiobooks or podcasts or whatever, and I can just tune back into nature, which is what I should be doing. It was really handy to have those, and I'm super glad that I bought them. Another decision that I'm pretty happy about from my technology side of things was this all-key 3 USB slot plug. So when I got to a restaurant or a cafe or a refugee, I would plug this thing in. Immediately I could charge my phone, I could charge my external battery pack, and I could charge my camera batteries immediately. And that was really important for me to keep those battery levels really high. In terms of the battery, this is a RAV Power 26,800 milliamp. I'm not honestly that psyched about this. I saw this recommended by a couple of other hikers and I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with it, but I found that it takes forever to charge. I found it really confusing that it has the regular USB and the Type-C. Still to this day, I don't know which one is better to use, the Type-C or the regular USB. You would think that you'd be able to charge this in sort of 4 or 5 hours, but sometimes I would leave it overnight and it would only have 2 out of 4 lights light up. And I'm like, fuck me, I just left this thing charged in all night. Once it did eventually charge up, I found that it did drain super quickly as well, especially with my phone. I would charge my phone once and I would lose 1 light out of 4, and then I would charge my phone twice and I would lose 2 lights out of 4. I mean, theoretically, if you've got 26,000 milliamps, you would think you'd be able to charge a phone like this 8, 9, 10 times, but you really only get probably maximum 3, maybe 4 at a pinch out of this battery. So I don't know, buy it if you want, but I think probably the better choice would just be to get an anchor. There's some camera stuff that I brought along. If you go out and you do a lot of filming and you have a Canon M50 like I do, I would definitely recommend getting this power extra charger. You can plug it straight into USB, into your power bank, and you can charge 2 batteries at a time. That is awesome. I'm super psyched about that. I brought a 2 meter USB-C cable to charge my phone. It's really nice to have that 2 meters. I could plug it in a cafe and have plenty of room to be able to, you know, use my phone whilst it was still plugged in. So that was a good decision. That was a tip from Jupiter. Thanks, buddy. This was also kind of a tip from Jupiter. I got a Phoenix E16 and I thought rather than wearing a head torch, I could just clip it to my hat. I regret that decision. I wish I brought a head torch because a lot of the time when you're using a head torch, you just quickly need to put it on and find something in your tent or you're cooking or whatever. you have to find the hat and then put it on the hat. It's just annoying. So next time I'm just going to bring a head torch. Now if you're interested in my feedback on the tent, the lightweight prior arm, I love this tent, to be honest. It's super quick to set up and pack down. I kept my tent pegs connected to it all the time, so it would literally take me 2 or 3 minutes to set up and pack down. It is lighter than any tent you're likely to find on the market at only 750 grams. I think it's more comfortable than using just a tarp, since you've got the inner floor to keep everything organized. You've got the vestibule, which I use to keep anything that I didn't need inside the tent with me overnight. It never leaked, it holds up really well in the rain and stands up really strong in the wind, especially when compared to the big Agnes, as you can see there, that didn't handle the wind too well. I think it's the perfect shelter if you want something lightweight, if you're using a trekking pole anyway and you don't want to bring poles but still want to have the feeling of the tent. This tent tarp hybrid style from Lightweight Equipment would be the way to go. One pretty average decision that I think I can improve on is buying really cheap, shitty tent pegs. This looks like an MSI Groundhog. It's not. It's just like a crappy one from Amazon, and I snapped 2 or 3 of those. They are very lightweight, but when you get into really hard ground, you would just snap them. But in the future, I think I'm just going to splash out and get real MSI Groundhogs or something of that level of quality in the future, because these are just rubbish. Another thing that was pretty garbage was my silicone food bags. They really only lasted about a week before they started to split around the seam, and ended up just eventually going with your normal Ziploc bags. I had all my food sorted out into these Ziploc bags. One thing I'll definitely do in the lead up to my next through hike is just collect these things and have all different sizes of them. This is my food bag. It's an Exped dry bag. Pretty heavy duty. My cooking gear, obviously I had a gas stove. In here is my little cook set, my trusty Covia stove, which is quite a few years old but is still going, and my titanium 650ml pot from Lichada. One thing I will comment on this is that I wish I got one slightly larger. It is difficult to cook fresh vegetables in a pot that is this small, and I was pretty jealous some of the other guys had bigger pots and they were able to cut up fresh veggies and throw them in. So I'll probably get a 950ml pot in future. One thing you have to keep in mind with these titanium pots is because they are very thin, they do burn pretty quick at the bottom, so you really just need to make sure that you're almost constantly stirring the food. My Sea to Summit long handle spoon, that was great, no real comments on that. In terms of my water situation on the GR11, I just had that 2-litre water bottle, and I didn't end up bringing the fair cap because I broke it. So I ended up bringing this one, which is pretty similar to like your Sawyer squeeze. You just screw it on the top. I did find that the flow rate was very, very minimal, and I got really frustrated with it along the way. I took a couple of chances where I was really thirsty and just drank from streams directly, but I ended up being fine. I would say definitely bring a water filter, but there's many opportunities where you don't have to use them. The one thing that I'm super glad that I brought on this trip was this soft flask. This was a godsend. I actually just kept that in the sleeve on my shoulder strap, so I had water basically here all the time, and so that meant that I could drink really regularly. I could just lean down and take some, and that was as good as having like a Camelback with a sleeve, so I didn't have to take my backpack off. I could just whip it out, fill it up from a spring along the way, and I was good to go. Clothing, I'm pretty happy with my clothing choices. I had my nice little lightweight running shorts. I had a polypropylene base layer, which I only used probably once or twice. I even actually bought these halfway through the trip because I didn't need them for the first half. I had my smart wool base layer, long sleeve with a hood. Then I had my wool icebreaker beanie, my Cortazu jacket, which I obviously love. I'm super happy that I brought that. Kept me dry in the 1 or 2 days that I had of rain. I was super lucky, had hardly any rain. I didn't have a down jacket, I didn't have a fleece or anything like that. No mid layer at all, so it was good to have a really nice warm jacket. So I'm pretty stoked on that decision. I did not bring rain pants at all. Whenever I wear rain pants, I tend to just get sweaty legs anyway, so it's pointless. I was pretty warm in just my running shorts and my polypropylene base layer when it was raining anyway. That was never really a problem. One thing I do like to have is warm, dry hands though. So I had these Windstopper Lafuma gloves. Now these are 4 or 5 years old. They're kind of torn and totally wrecked, so these ones are going to go in the bin, but it's really nice to have warm hands when it's wet, cold and windy. Just probably the best clothing gear decision I made for the entire trip was to bring these Silverlight, formerly Venturi socks. I did bring this long version and a short version. I regret that decision. I should have just brought 2 pairs of the long versions. So these socks are absolutely amazing, guys. You have to get a pair. They're blister proof. They stay warm when they're wet because they're Australian merino wool. It's not just like wearing a loose bag on your foot, because they have the structure of the silver lining within the sock itself. They are constantly being improved by Ralph, the guy that heads up the company. I'm in contact with this guy pretty regularly, and I really don't think there's too much they can do to improve it though. They have a lifetime guarantee even, so I mean, you really can't go wrong. I've now thrown out every single pair of socks that I have, and I only have Silverlights and a couple of pairs of ski socks, but apart from that, this is the only pair of socks that I'm ever going to need. Unfortunately, that sun hat that I brought, I lost it at some stage, probably still along the trail somewhere. Maybe if someone picks it up, you can send it to me. I really liked that hat. In terms of the Coolmax fabric that I brought, I'm still, I think, pretty happy with that decision. I think what I'll do in future is bring 1 Coolmax and 1 merino. Merino wool, you guys know that I'm a massive fan of. I think the best possible situation for me would have been to bring 1 merino t-shirt and 1 Coolmax t-shirt, and on the really hot days wear the Coolmax one, and any other day wear the merino one. And I would probably wear the merino one as it's sort of getting towards washing day, because the Coolmax one would just stink too much, whereas the merino, because of the antimicrobial properties, be a lot less stinky, and you could sort of get away with wearing something like that for a little bit longer. Okay, now let's get into the sleep system. So I have my little 4-class pillow from Decathlon. One thing I realized when I got home is that I could have just saved myself nearly 80 or 90 grams by just throwing away the outside or leaving that at home and just bringing the inside, which is plenty comfortable enough. You know, that's the most important part of the pillow. So whilst the outside is nice and soft, the inner would have been fine. Probably didn't even need the bag either. So I didn't bring a sleeping bag. I brought a Quilt / Poncho from Us. So this is my first time using a synthetic bag. Up until this point, I've only used down. There's a couple of really good things about synthetic fabrics in sleeping equipment that I like, and that is, firstly, it's not plucked from an animal against its will, and secondly, synthetic, when it's damp or when it's wet, will still keep you warm. It'll still keep that loft. So one of the guys I was hiking with, he had a down bag and he was constantly trying to dry it out, whereas if mine got a little damp, which it sometimes did, it doesn't really ever matter. It was still going to keep me warm and it was still going to have that loft. So the downside, of course, of synthetic is that it is very voluminous. Like, I've got a really pretty strong compression bag here to squeeze it all down, but synthetic does end up taking a lot of space. Like, if I had an equivalent down product, it would be half the size of this probably. So I know people are going to have questions about this poncho system and whether I enjoyed it or whether it worked or not. I absolutely love this poncho thing. It was so good to sit around in the morning. I would just wrap myself up in this, look outside of my tent, take some big deep breaths, do some meditation, just take in the morning and take in my surroundings and just be super warm and comfortable. So in terms of sleeping in it, there is a couple of things that you'll want to keep in mind. So this has a button system which wraps up and contains you as a sleeping bag. I would probably like in future to add more buttons, just because there is some gaps in between there that can let cold air in. I tend to sleep on my side usually, so I'd have the lines of buttons kind of running down my shoulder line down towards my hips, and that would prevent any kind of cold air from coming in. But I think adding some more buttons would really just help to keep that hot air contained in there. because having this kind of system where you don't bring a down jacket and you just use your sleeping bag, poncho, quilt as your dry warmth when you're in a tent really worked for me. Might not work for everybody, but I really enjoyed it and I'm pretty happy with that decision. I never really had a cold night despite the fact that I had almost nothing underneath me. This is my Camp Essentials light mat, 315 grams. Someone commented in the last video about what the R value is. I think the R value would be 0 basically. It has no kind of insulation within it at all. It's just literally air between you and the ground. I did have a little incident with this mat where I had a slow leak, and so there was a couple of nights where I would wake up and this thing was totally flat. But I did find the leak. I put a little tenacious tape on the leak and now it's absolutely fine. So at the end of the day, I'm pretty happy with the things that I brought on this trip. Sure, I've made some mistakes, but I've learned some lessons, and I think that's pretty much the only thing you can hope for, is learning from others, learning from your own mistakes, and continuing to improve your process over time. I've received a bunch of questions on Instagram about this trip specifically, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and answer those questions. I'm going to do that in a separate video, which you can see here. Guys, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button, that really helps. I'll see you on the summit.